All right, y'all. We want to welcome y'all back to another episode of the HuntStand podcast. And today we're going to be talking everything whitetail facts. And we've got none other than Mr. Brian Murphy on here today, who is on Team HuntStand. Brian, I'm not even going to attempt to introduce you because you've got such a decorated history and just everything you've done in the whitetail world. So for those that are listening today that may not know who you are, give them the skinny of Brian Murphy.
Thanks, Will and Josh. Good to be with you guys. As always, love talking hunting and deer biology and management with you. I'm a lifetime deer geek. I mean, that's how I describe myself. I grew up just deeply interested in whitetail deer from a very young age, and have been fortunate enough to have a career spanning almost 50 years where I've been able to work with deer 24/7, 365 in some capacity my entire professional life. Living a boyhood dream, frankly, and it was sparked at a young age. I grew up as a very young boy in northeastern Oklahoma, where deer were very rare at the time. And we lived out in the country, and I grew up with a BB gun and a 22 in hand, like a lot of country kids did. And I remember pedaling my bike to my nearest neighbor who lived a mile from me to go fishing in his pond one summer, and found what I thought was a deer track. I was 11 years old, 10 or 11, and thought I'd found a deer track. And I went back and got my father, and he came down and said, "Yes, son, we actually have deer in the area." But that was the first evidence, and this is hard for a lot of hunters today to understand because deer are so common, but this was not the case then. There was no hunting season for whitetails in that county at the time. Today, it's the number one whitetail producing county in Oklahoma. But again, that was a long time ago. It was back in the 70s, and not long after restocking of whitetails in that part of the country. And a few months later, I was out BB gun in hand on our farm and bumped into a whitetail doe face to face at about 30 yards. And it just absolutely changed my life. It was a brief encounter. We both were startled with each other's presence. And a few months later, my father summoned us to the back window, looking up in the back pasture, and there was a group of 3 or 4 deer feeding under an oak tree. And that, at that point, I just absolutely had to know everything about these mysterious creatures that lived out there. And the following year, I was reading an Outdoor Life magazine at age 12, and it spoke to a deer biologist doing deer work somewhere, probably in the Midwest or Northeast. And I just had an epiphany that day and said, that's what I'm going to do in life. And did what all 12-year-olds do and summoned their parents and said, I have decided what I'm going to be when I grow up. And they looked at me, and I told them I was going to be a wildlife biologist with a specialty in deer. And they looked at me quite puzzled and asked me if that was a real job and if it actually paid money. And at that age, I didn't really care because I knew that was my destiny. If you have a destiny, if there is such a thing in people's life, I knew that was my only path to happiness. Thankfully, both my parents supported following your heart, not necessarily a career that makes a bunch of money. And they're both educators, and that's what they chose. And so I was fortunate enough. We eventually moved to Texas. I did my undergraduate at Texas Tech University. That gave me an opportunity to work on some of the ranches in deep South Texas that had been pioneers in the early deer management movement, pioneered by Al Brothers, the famous Al Brothers, biologist who you both have met and spent some time with. He had written a book in the 70s, produced in 1975, called Producing Quality Whitetails, that sparked this modern quality deer management movement. But it took about 10 years for this book to really gain traction. And so that was good timing for me because I entered college undergrad in 1985, 10 years after the book came out. So by then it had gotten just enough of a foothold that it was considered fairly mainstream. And so that got me an opportunity to learn and to see these things in practice in Texas. And then that actually got my foot in the door at the University of Georgia later for my graduate work. And from then on, it's just been a wild, fun ride of deer stuff all over the U.S. and even abroad. So yeah, just a wonderful dream opportunity that I couldn't be more thankful for.
And you just got a distinguished alumnus award at University of Georgia too, didn't you?
Yeah, actually, I haven't received it physically yet, so they may change their mind. It's a couple of days from now. It's this Friday, but yeah, I was selected as the 2025 Distinguished Alumnus Award winner for the University of Georgia's Forestry and Wildlife School, called the Warnell School of Forestry and Wildlife. Uh, it's an award that's been out since I guess the early 1990s. So to be one of about 20 odd folks that have received that award, I'm very very humbled and honored. Yes, very much.
Well, congratulations, man. That's awesome. The HuntStand podcast is powered by Muddy Outdoors. For Josh and I, we run Muddy because it plain works. From tree stands to box blinds and the new Deviate camo and boots, it's the gear we trust every season. When you're spending long hours in the woods, it makes a difference having equipment that's built for hunters by hunters. And that's why we stick with Muddy. To check it out, head to gomuddy.com.
Crossbow hunting has opened a lot of doors for keeping our hunting traditions alive. Crossbows have been great for bringing new hunters into our circle, but also for keeping older bow hunters in the field. No matter where you're at in your crossbow hunting journey, you can look to our partners at 10 Point to find the most diverse line of crossbows with the best of the best technology for virtually any budget. Head on over to 10pointcrossbows.com and use the crossbow selector tool to find your next setup. Brian, we shared our stories on the kind of reintroduction of this new HuntStand podcast, and I had shared that when I was young, my goal was to be a fighter pilot, so things would have been a lot different, and God forbid, maybe I wouldn't have even been here right now at all on the earth if I would have chose that one. But it's kind of funny thinking about how you envision things as a kid and then where it actually ends up. And I think there are very few individuals who follow through with that initial like dream as a kid. So it's cool that you did that. And I guess what did that landscape look like competitively back then? Because it seems like now, I can't imagine how many people are wanting to follow in your footsteps and do that same kind of thing. But it seems like it's pretty competitive at this point. I mean, spending time around you, it seems like there's a handful of household names in the whitetail world. Doesn't seem to get much bigger over time. So like, was it a little bit? Was the barrier to entry a little bit less at that time, or what was that like?
Yeah, well, it's different. It's certainly the landscape has changed. First of all, there are probably at least 20 good wildlife programs out there that I'm aware of, university wildlife programs. There's more than that, but 20 is what I would consider the top flight schools, each producing a couple of hundred wildlife graduates a year each. So you're talking about thousands of wildlife graduates hitting the market every year. And I tell all of them that come to me for advice or what have you, is you better have it in your gut. I mean, you better have a passion that is driving you every day, because you've got to separate yourself. If you don't make the top 10% of your class, and I don't mean academically necessarily, I mean passion, connections, experience. I mean, you've got to want it. You can't just show up and hope. And some of them do. And I tell them, I don't have a lot of hopes for you being, having a lot of advancement opportunity if you're not willing to get up early, show up late, work late, work hard, get every bit of experience you can, and more than anything, want it more than anybody else.
Yeah.
Because passion is what drives our field. And most wildlife biologists you run across are passionate, because that's, they don't make a lot of money. Most, it's not a career that you're going to make a lot of money. You're going to get a lot of flack from the public. They're never going to, fully love what you say and do in many cases, particularly in the upper Midwest and Northeast. There's a lot of animosity at times. So you got to really want it. The other thing that has changed is the gender makeup. When I was in undergrad and graduate school, less than 20% of my colleagues were female. Today, it's 50% or more in most programs.
Oh, wow.
For a lot of reasons. Most importantly is what I will call the academic barrier. I'll use my alma mater, Georgia, as an example. To get in the University of Georgia now, just to get into the program, undergrad, you have to have almost a 4.0 average coming out of high school. I mean, it's the barrier to entry is very, very difficult. And a lot of country kids, as I kind of consider myself one, hook and bullet country kid, I had decent grades, but I would not probably get into the University of Georgia now. which is sad. My greatest mentor, Joe Hamilton, founded the Quality Deer Management Association. Both of you know Joe. He too would say very openly that academically he probably wouldn't get in, and yet he's the most decorated conservationist of our time. So that concerns me. And I had this conversation with our dean. I actually serve on the dean's advisory board for the University of Georgia's School of Forestry. And that's what I shared more than anything is do not ever take that ability of a professor to bypass strict grade requirements and look at the quality of the student. Because my major professors, Dr. Larry Marston and Dr. Carl Miller, took a little bit of a gamble on me. I actually drove a pickup truck from West Texas, no air conditioning, all the way to Georgia. Drove 1,000 miles, and they told me we don't have any graduate scholarships for you right now. No projects. I said I don't care. I'm coming anyway because I am your guy, and I want to work under you. They were the gurus at the time, and I drove 1,000 miles, out there with a 3 on a tree, pickup truck, no air conditioning, and showed up. And by the time I left for the weekend, they offered me a graduate project because, I convinced them that I had the drive and energy and motivation to get it done and to make them proud. And yeah, if you can overlook just good enough grades to get in, I wasn't terrible, but I wasn't a star. If you could just kind of overlook a little bit, trust me, I will make you proud. And and I try to do just that.
Man, I'd have to imagine that. Like, what did the in terms of like wildlife studies and in terms of like college degrees for that sort of thing back in the day before the 70s, what were people even doing before whitetails were reintroduced? That had to have really changed that entire thing. Just that alone.
Yeah, I mean, if it weren't for whitetails, a lot of it was restoration biology before it became wildlife management. It's how do we restore turkeys? How do we restore deer, elk, pronghorn, waterfowl, certain waterfowl species, upland game birds. So what we changed, if you come out of the 30s, Aldo Leopold days of the 30s and 40s, it was building a foundation of what wildlife management even is and how to restore habitats, restore populations. We never thought, and I say we being our forefathers in the wildlife profession, never considered a day, I don't think, where we would be overabundant with these species. We were just trying to get them back to huntable, sustainable populations where everybody, both hunters and non-hunters, could enjoy their presence out there. Those who wanted to hunt the surplus could do so, but overabundance of deer and geese and elk and these things that we deal with that can become nuisance animals now, I don't think was ever believed to even be possible. So I think we've outpunted our coverage when it comes to, we have the gold standard wildlife model for the world. It's called North American Model of Wildlife Conservation. It is the envy of the world in terms of how we manage our wildlife populations. It is a user pay system where license fees and federal excise taxes on our firearms and our equipment and also on the fishing side help pay for this model and have these wonderful state wildlife agencies with staffs and teams of folks out there working on our behalf. It does not look like this in other parts of the world. So when I hear hunters grumble about anything, I kind of say, hey, guys and gals, let's step back and look at how good we have it. We live in a country where in most cases, if you're an in-state hunter, you can hunt deer and elk or deer and bear and whatever for generally under $100 a year for an in-state resident in most states. My home state, it cost me a whopping $45, and I could shoot 12 whitetails and a few turkeys and a few other critters year round for $45. Yeah, you got to find land and access and all that sort of thing. But hunters that grumble about paying a little bit to access a piece of land will go out and drop $2,000 on a high-end Sitka suit or whatever it is and not think, or a bow, a new bow every couple of years. So we just have to keep things in perspective, but we have it pretty doggone good.
You just made me realize some of those early figures, like you mentioned, Aldo Leopold. I never thought about it from this perspective, but it seems like a major role of some of those guys was just they were so poetic in how they talked about everything. And I didn't realize how important that must have been at the time, just to get people inspired and motivated to want to get behind a bunch of this stuff and the restoration and like starting from scratch almost in a lot of ways. Like without voices like that, It wasn't like they were necessarily practicing active management or biology. They were like dreaming about what that possibility would be. And that had to have been
No
pretty
doubt about it. I
important.
mean, if you look back at the early days, and you're talking about Teddy Roosevelt, Gifford Pinchot, um, James Byrd Grinnell. I mean, these are names from the early 1900s that were the various people within forestry and wildlife and the press that helped this movement gain traction, because it was a dire time. And if you look at groups even like the Boone and Crockett Club, a lot of people equate Boone and Crockett Club with the group that measures all the big game and gives trophies and awards. That's not why it was formed. It was formed because there was a true fear, not just a little fear. I mean, it was almost a foregone conclusion fear that all these species would be wiped out of North America, and the only remaining evidence of the range in size and age and species and all the things would be the Boone and Crockett records, which had documented examples of all these species, the range of their skulls and antlers and various things, so that we could look back 100 years after they were all gone, like the bison and the passenger pigeon, and look back and say that's what they look like and that's how big they were on average. There was never a belief that this would be an ongoing record system as it is today. Equally important, Teddy Roosevelt, creating the national park system and other things to create land base for some remnant populations. It was feared again that many of these would be gone if we didn't tie up big chunks of land and have little remnant populations of elk or bear or whatever. So they had to create a sense of urgency and fear. But I think one of the most important and almost unbelievable, monumental tasks that I think happened in our world, the wildlife world, is the passage of the Pittman-Robertson Act in 1937. And for those that don't know what this is the funding engine of wildlife conservation. So in 1937, and think about what was happening in America in 1937, just after the greatest depression of our time. Okay, people were out of work, no food, no nothing. And here comes a group of people introducing a bill that would put an 11% tax on all these things to fund wildlife conservation at a time when people couldn't even feed their families. So how do you think about it in today's political environment? How you'd pass something like an 11% tax on any industry at a time when people are starving to death, literally in our streets. So they pulled off a coup and passed the Pittman-Robertson Act in 1937, which again puts an 11% tax on most of the items that hunters buy regularly: guns, ammunition, et cetera, et cetera. There was a later, there's a version in the archery world, there's a version in the fishing world that came later. So we are taxed on a lot of the things that we as hunters and anglers and archers use, which then goes to ultimately to the federal government. The federal government then reallocates those funds back to the state agencies based on a particular model, but it has something to do with the size of the state and the number of licensed hunters and anglers in that state. So it's a formula. But the combination of the license fees you buy to hunt in Georgia, Texas, Maine, Mississippi, wherever, that stays in the state. But then there's these excise taxes that get also brought back. The combination of those two sources of funds are the primary mechanism through which state agencies stay alive and do the work that they do. But without those PR dollars, we would not even be able to recognize what we have today. It would be so drastically less significant and poorer than what we have. So I don't mind spending. I don't like to be taxed any more than anybody else. But when it comes to hunting and fishing stuff, that's one tax I don't mind paying. And yeah, is it perfect? Do they use every penny wisely? No, but I can assure you, having worked in state agencies and worked with a lot of state agencies and also worked in federal agencies, I'll take state agency efficiency over federal agency efficiency every day.
Yeah.
Is it perfect? No.
Yeah.
But is it better than the rest of our government? Yes. I will say that unequivocally.
Yeah.
Yeah, the North American model, like you said, it is the envy of the world. And it seems like a lot of the pieces kind of just fell together, not even necessarily by design, but when the whole thing did end up coming together, like you're talking about Pittman-Robertson Act, like without all of those pieces falling into place the way that they did, there's no way that the model would be nearly as strong as it is. And
that's right. And we
I mean,
also are blessed with the Second Amendment, which isn't really part of the wildlife model per se, but it is. It's a supportive piece. And having worked abroad, which I did, I worked in Australia for a number of years where they didn't have a Second Amendment or something similar. And they lost a lot of their firearm rights because of it. And so we have the perfect model here. And what's really, really cool is that if you look at the millions of acres of wildlife habitat that hunters, not agencies, not government, not state, that hunters create, we create more acres for wildlife, hunters do, than any other entity, and we pay for it ourselves. The general public ought to be thanking hunters for the abundance of butterflies and honeybees and neotropical migrant birds and other things because of the millions of acres of habitat that we are creating on our dime for deer and turkey primarily. That's okay. And that's what I tell anybody. Well, you're only doing it because you want to grow deer and turkey, or I'm like, yeah. And what's your argument? So what's your point?
Exactly.
Are your species, are you paying for songbird habitat? Are you paying are you going out planting those food plots and burning and thinning timber and doing those things? And unless you say you're doing it, then you need to just keep your trap shut and let us continue to grow your species for you.
Well, even if it's even if it's not that, like you don't have to be a bird. You don't even have to appreciate wildlife at all. But at its base, cleaner water and cleaner air. Everybody needs that to thrive. So like even at its base, what we do, all those things for wildlife management and wildlife conservation and making sure that these landscapes are in place. Yes, we're proud to say that we do it. So we have huntable populations of these animals forever. But the spillover, even just at its core, affects all human life. Clean water, clean air. So there's no way that you can even argue against it unless you're not human.
No, I love getting into arguments with uninformed folks, whether it be on hunting issues or conservation issues, because we have the argument so hands down one that it's just really not even a fair fight. But but no, it's it's a good time out there for the whitetail. We have challenges. We are at or near record abundance levels still, and have been kind of off and on. We've kind of fluctuated for the last decade, somewhere in the probably 25 to 30 million whitetail range, depending on a number of things. This year we did have still just about over, but we had a pretty significant EHD outbreak, particularly in Southeast Ohio. We continue to see chronic wasting disease spread. Georgia being the most recent addition to that, my home state. That leaves only South Carolina and the entire southern half of the United States without known CWD infection. So, we've got issues. We've got declining hunter numbers, aging hunters. We've got struggling, hunter recruitment programs that are struggling to get enough people to fill some of these programs. So while we have a lot of good things going, we certainly have challenges facing us moving forward. And habitat loss and conversion is a continual issue. We've got close to 300 million people in the U.S. now. I don't know what the number is, but it's not going anything but up, and so too is the pressure on our rural lands.
This episode is brought to you by StealthCam, delivering industry-leading trail cameras built for serious hunters. When it comes to monitoring food plots or patterning deer, StealthCam gives us the clarity, reliability, and tools we count on season after season. Explore the full lineup at stealthcam.com.
When it comes to ammunition, the only way you're going to find the best match for your next hunt is if you've got options. And that's exactly what you'll get from our partners at Federal, the biggest line of ammo that you'll find anywhere. Federal loads their own award-winning bullet designs, like Terminal Ascent, one of our favorite all-around hunting bullets. And you won't find any shortage of time-tested favorites like the Nosler AccuBond, all-copper Barnes bullets, or even the Sierra Game King. And if you're one of us who enjoy the benefits of shooting a suppressed rifle with a shorter barrel, check out the groundbreaking 7mm Backcountry. It's a proprietary cartridge design from Federal that achieves maximum performance even from shorter barrels. Get loaded up for your next hunt at federalpremium.com. Yeah, I mean, your focus has always been on whitetails, but fortunately, whitetails are able to adapt better than most other big game species, maybe even any big game species. But you talk about things like roads and habitat fragmentation and fences and how those things affect some of the western big game species, it's a real threat. But thankfully, whitetails are as resilient as they are. We'd be probably the clock would be fast forwarded into the urgency, the emergency level on where we're kind of
No
headed.
doubt. In fact, the whitetails is, not just because I've spent my life's work working with this animal, but I think just independent of that, they are the perfect big game animal in so many respects. They can adapt to anything, literally from jungles to arid deserts to subalpine Canadian forests. A lot of hunters don't realize the true extent of the whitetail range. It goes from essentially the tree line in Canada, subalpine, mountain regions, all the way down to northern South America. So we're talking about all the way through Mexico and through Central America into northern South America. To my knowledge, there is not a more widely distributed big game animal on the planet. Certainly one tolerant of literally everything from our little coos or cows deer in the desert Southwest, living out there in 5-inch rainfall areas, to some of the tropical areas getting 150 inches of rainfall, almost jungle environments, to, again, subalpine areas of Canada, and everything in between, including backyards, urban areas. We know they can eat upwards of 700 different plant species. That allows them to adapt to about any environment out there. They are just, they're beautiful, they're tasty, they're unpredictable enough to drive us crazy as hunters. Despite all the patterning we think we can do, they will still do something different quite often. They're just an incredibly fascinating animal that has become, highly fine-tuned to do what it does over a couple of million year period. So it's really quite interesting.
And then I think it's pretty safe to say that without the whitetail, we all wouldn't even be sitting here. I mean, they went nearly extinct, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Numbers got down below 500,000 across the United States.
That's right. No, without, I mean, it's been said that 80% of hunters in America hunt deer, among other things. But
Right.
if they hunt anything, they're going to hunt deer. And without deer, we would not have a hunting economy even anywhere close to what it is. So without the whitetail, and yeah, it's great that we have these other species out there, and I love them all. But the whitetail is the backbone. It is the core of our existence. It funds everything. And without it, think about what the archery industry would look like without whitetails, or pick any part of the whitetail business, tree stands and trail cams. Yeah, we'd use them for some of these other species, but not like whitetails. I mean, there are 4 times, and if you just kind of divide the country in half, from, we'll say, Texas north to the Dakotas, everything to the east of that, there are 4 hunters east of that line for every 1 hunter west of that line.
Wow.
And of course, that eastern half of the U.S. is the stronghold of the whitetail. So, just numerically, we've got much higher, our densest population centers in the country. Most of them are in the eastern half of the United States. And so, if you think about the big cities in the east, all pumping hundreds of thousands of deer hunters out, that's when we can really see the significance. And I've said it before, and I've said it kind of in jest, but I mean it, wholeheartedly. If you picked probably the second or third weekend in November in America, when almost every state is out hunting deer wise, we could have as many as 10 million hunters afield on any given weekend. That's the largest standing army in the world. So if any country is considering coming over, don't do it in November, second or third week in November, because you've got a standing army of 10 million. They're already camo clad, ready to shoot something. So it's a big force of people. And, all you have to do is go to an event like the SHOT Show or something like that to get an appreciation for how big, what this industry really looks like when you see the magnitude of it. I've had the pleasure of traveling all over the U.S. and meeting with hunters and state and federal government agencies and NGOs. And, I've kind of seen the A to Z of everything pretty much there is in the industry. But I'm still shocked and amazed when I see, something like the SHOT Show, when you have, 13 miles of booth frontage. Just to walk by every booth one time is 13 miles. that gives you some scope and scale of and that's mostly a firearm show, but it's tied to our industry.
Yeah.
So yeah, pretty cool. There's no other country in the world that comes close to what we have here in all those ways.
No, not even close. And something I actually want to come back to, Brian. I think we glaze over it quite often, but you've talked about your time in Australia working on is it game preserves or ranches out there? I'm not exactly sure what they're called, but talk to us a little bit about your experience in Australia.
Yeah, I had a real unique opportunity as a young wildlife biologist. In fact, I had just graduated, just received my master's degree at the University of Georgia in the early '90s, and my two former major professors actually hired me on before I even finished up to work for University of Georgia as a deer research coordinator. So I was the one in charge of our captive deer facility and was the liaison between all the research projects that both master's and PhD level students were working on, and their professors. So I was the kind of the cheese in the sandwich between all of that, and loved it. I mean, that was a great first job for me because I got to get up every day and work on different aspects of deer research and think of new projects. We did scent communication, deer vision work, behavior, glands. I mean, we just did a lot of really cool, fun stuff. But then all of a sudden the door came knocking, and I had a chance to do something very, very different, and actually moved to Australia and become the first officially trained deer biologist in their country at 26 years of age. So I was just a young pup and full of piss and vinegar, as they say. And and it was quite an opportunity. I was based in Tasmania, Australia, which is the island state south of the main continent there.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked primarily with fallow deer, and fallow deer are not native. No, there are no native deer to Australia. There were 12 species that were liberated in attempts to get them to stick. Half of them made it and half of them didn't. So there are 6 species that made it. Whitetail's not one of them. So I was working primarily with fallow deer, which I had worked with some in Texas as an undergrad student. So that was kind of my one bit of experience that I had, other than I was willing to dive into the fire and give it a go. And stayed. It was supposed to be a 2-year project. It became 4 years. It became one of the greatest transformative periods of my life. Made lifelong friends, but it was not easy. I was thrown into a foxhole, and they were throwing grenades in the foxhole when I got there. Deer had caused quite a contentious relationship between landowners and a lot of other groups, being hunters, forestry, agriculture, parks and wildlife. This was an overabundant deer issue. Farmers were struggling financially because the wool market had started to collapse, and the wool market had been primarily the backbone of the Australian rural economy. Prices started to tank in the '80s, and so all of a sudden these overabundant deer were causing headaches because they needed to put more sheep and diversify in agriculture and do these other things, try to make a living. So
Yeah.
they wanted to, right before I arrived, they were planning to deregulate deer altogether and allow you to use poison baits, shoot them at night, dig them in, any method you so chose, but take seasons off of them, structure, bag limits, that sort of thing. And so I was kind of their Hail Mary. If they, when I arrived, they said, you got 2 years to fix it or else. And everybody was mad at everybody. No one trusted anybody. Poaching was rife. There were a lot of serious issues, and so I dove in, typical Irish fashion, dove in with both feet, and just said, "We're gonna get there. It may come easier. It may come kicking and screaming, but we're gonna get there." And the first thing I had to do was build confidence in me from them, that I was there to help them. I had no ulterior motive. My goal was to try to find a sustainable solution that made everybody as close to happy as possible. And that took some time. And there were more than one occasion where, as the locals will say, they want to get in a punch up, get in a fight, where they weren't happy with me being there. But slowly but surely I gained their confidence and trust, and before the project was over, we expanded it from 2 to 4 years, to the point where they actually brought me in the Parks and Wildlife Service to establish a game management unit to continue these programs. We had amassed 500,000 acres of cooperating landowners.
Wow.
Working on these management plans, using quality deer management as the deer management technique but using a broader property-based game management planning program that me and a former colleague over there created. It was kind of the master plan, of which deer was a piece of it, but we had all these other animals to manage as well, because there were a lot of things that eat pasture and grass and crops over there besides deer. A lot of funny little hoppers, little marsupial, mini kangaroos called wallabies, a couple of million of those in 2 different species. We had the brush-tailed possum, we had feral cats, we had feral rabbits, feral hares, European hares. So we had a lot of things besides deer to deal with. Deer just happened to be kind of the most visible big one out there, but we had to do a holistic approach, and it worked exceptionally well. And that was that. And then my last year there was when they had a civilian massacre. A local 26-year-old young man went to a local historic site there and killed 34 people and wounded 19 others by himself, which is quite significant, including little 3 and 4-year-old girls. And it was just a horrific shooting event that had never happened like that in all of Australia. I mean, that was a one-off. Well, unfortunately, we've become somewhat immune to things in the U.S. However, that was very different for them. And it also happened in rural, sleepy Tasmania, where I was living, not up in Melbourne or Sydney or some of the big areas that you might think would be the likely spots. So that created this backlash against firearm ownership, which was already very restrictive. However, it was soon to get even more restrictive. And the prime minister at the time, John Howard, introduced very quickly a national gun bill that would prohibit all semi-automatic configurations of any caliber. So we're talking about rimfire 22s. If they were semi-automatic, they would be banned. Every rifle, every shotgun, any semi-automatic configuration gone. Pistols were already banned before all this. And they even included pump shotguns in this list. So pump action shotguns and every semi-automatic was going to be banned under this act. And so I'm sitting there at the Parks and Wildlife Service. This is my last year in Australia, and they'd moved me into the Parks and Wildlife Service to set up this game unit. So I'm sitting there in my office, and my boss, the Minister for the Environment, calls me in his office and said, Brian, you've been asked to brief Parliament on this bill and the use of firearm ownership for game and pest management in Tasmania. And I said, oh, great. When? Like next week? And he said, no, in 2 hours. And I'm like, I've got to go brief Parliament, state Parliament, the upper house of Parliament in 2 hours. And I'm like, he's like, yeah. And I said, okay, well, it's going to take me an hour to go home and get the one suit that I own, get that put on and get back down there. He said, well, you better hustle. I said, how long do they want me to talk for? And he said, oh, about 45 minutes. I said, I've got to speak in front of Parliament for 45 minutes, 2 hours from now. He said, yeah, mate, good luck. So I went home and got my suit and showed up at Parliament House. They whisked me in, got me through security, and I'm standing there like a lost puppy. I'm not even 30 years old yet. I'm 29 years old. I'm sitting there going, how did a country boy from Oklahoma and Texas end up here? And about that time, a very stoic 6'5" British looking fella shows up with this long coat on, and Mr. Murphy, are you ready? I was like, I guess I am. And so he very sort of structurally, guides me up this ornate staircase to the upper house of Parliament. And as I'm going up, there's a 20-foot tall portrait of the Queen of England there. And I'm like, I am definitely not in Oklahoma or Texas anymore.
No.
And we get to the top of the staircase, and he asked me again if I'm ready now. And I said, yeah. And he ceremoniously grabs these 2 wrought iron door handles and opens these giant doors, very, ceremoniously. And there I am looking at 16 members of the upper house of Parliament in their wigs and robes along this long mahogany table with an empty chair at the front of the table for me to sit in. And here I go. So I walk in there and sit down and do my spiel and, walk out of there going, well, that's a once in a lifetime little memory book deal. And then get back to my office. And the next week, my boss calls me back in and said, the member of the upper house, the leader of the upper house has seconded you during the passage of this firearms bill. I said, what in the world does seconded mean? And he said, oh, mate, he said, it's a British term. He said, it means borrowed without prejudice. And I said, what does that mean to me? He goes, you're on loan to Parliament until he says you're not. I said, so what do I do? He said, you show up at Parliament. I said, well, what do they want me to do? I mean, what do I do there when I show up there? He said, whatever he asked you. So for the next 5 weeks, I worked every single day in Parliament with, luckily they didn't wear their wigs and robes unless they were in official capacity. So most of the time they looked like normal dudes. But so I sat around with mostly the state lawyer working on this bill, trying to find, various ways we could soften the impact for our hunters and farmers and so forth. And but at the end of the day, we didn't get much ground. The short version is I ended up standing in line with my Aussie mates as they had to hand in their firearms to the government. And you talk about something that sticks with you forever, is a feeling of standing in line with your best mates while they're holding, an armful of guns, some of which had been inherited and passed down for years through their families. And they had to hand them into the government to get them ground up and melted down into whatever they made with them. And it was a very somber, it was like going to a wake. We did this at police stations around Tasmania, and they did it on the mainland as well. I mean, this was Australia wide. They did pay for firearms. They did pay you for them and paid you a fair retail rate for a used firearm, but they couldn't pay for sentimental value, of course. But I do have the distinction, for what it's worth, of having the last legal pump shotgun out of Australia, because having worked daily with the bill, I knew when the prime minister was going to sign it into effect. And so I was actually at my local post office with my pump 12 gauge that I bought when I was 15 years old. It was a Mossberg, wasn't worth $50 retail. It was beat up as crap. I think I've taken 60 something different species with it. I wrote an article for Mossberg one time, and I come close to the most documented species with a single shotgun with that. But anyhow, I had it broken down with my mom's address on it. And 5 minutes before he signed it, I said, send this to Texas. So my Mossberg just got out under the radar and ended up back at my mother's house. And I have used it since to hunt with. But in fact, I killed a hog for HuntStand a few years ago in the swamps of South Carolina with it, testing some new high vis sights. So that was old Betsy. But yeah, it was quite a ride. I got to see and do things while I was in Australia that I never would have believed. I worked on deer species on the mainland of Australia as well, not just fallow deer down there. I've worked a little bit with red deer up in Queensland, Australia, a little bit with sambar deer. And to a lesser extent, the little diminutive hog deer down in southern Victoria, Australia. So yeah, quite a cool ride for a guy like me. And then when I came back in 1997,
hold on a second before we bring you back to the United States and Quality Deer Management Association and whatnot, I gotta ask regarding the punch ups. Have you ever gone to fists over deer?
Yes, more than once. Both in the U.S. and Australia. There were some of the groups that I was trying to befriend and gain their trust while in Australia. And Aussies like to drink and they like to fight. I mean, they're good folks and their hearts are great, but they don't mind a good punch up and they call it getting on the piss, getting on the drink. So you can imagine I spent almost a month every year driving from rural hunting camp to rural hunting camp trying to gain their confidence. So I would work the days, but they were hunting a lot of those times. So a lot of my most effective time was after dark. So I had about 50 something different deer camps that I would go from one to the other. And then I would just stay in my truck or stay with the friendly ones at their camps overnight and get up and do it. I did this day after day, week after week during the hunting season. And there's a couple that just didn't like me, didn't want me there, didn't trust me, just, innately didn't want anybody else telling them anything. And one guy in particular, he loved to get in a punch up. And so, yeah, I had to defend myself more than once. And then even in America, in the early days of quality deer management movement, when we're talking about passing young bucks and shooting does, that generated some heated, you get rural parts of America and people getting on the drink and you're trying to tell them that they can't, shouldn't shoot a legal 1.5-year-old buck, or they need to shoot does, mama deer. People get a little off center sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, the old some of us old school deer biologists, we got a few scars to prove it. You got to, like I said, you got to really want it and be willing to take some guff every now and then. And but it's worth it for sure.
I have to imagine Australia naturally was a little bit rougher around the edges, considering, isn't it really an island with a bunch of people who are probably related to prisoners or fugitives.
Yeah, absolutely. Tasmania is
it was
known as, in fact, the common phrase there by mainland Australia is that everybody in Tasmania has two heads because they're so inbred. So a two-headed Tasmanian is considered the norm. Yeah, the worst of the worst convicts in all of Great Britain were shipped to Tasmania.
just dumped
The
off.
next, the next worst ones were shipped to mainland Australia. So Tasmania got the worst of the worst. So yeah, most of the folks there, if they're original Tasmanians, are descendants of the worst breed of convicts that Great Britain has ever known. And I can attest that some of that genetics does hold true. So yeah, it's they're wonderful people, but some of them, they were definitely, Australia, just even from a wildlife management perspective, was at least 10 or 20 years behind the States. So when I got there, it was like going back to the 1970s or 80s culturally, in many ways, which is both good and bad. They're very, once you befriend an Aussie, they are, I mean, you talking about true blue dinky die, as they say. I mean, they'll go to war with you they're a little standoffish at first, but boy, once you get into their circle of trust, they will absolutely, kill for you and me for them. So yeah, it was really a trust building exercise more than anything else. It was, as I've always said, deer are easy to manage. It's the people that are the trick. Wildlife management is about people management. It's about managing outcomes, expectations, education. There's a lot of pieces of deer management, of which the deer themselves are probably the easiest piece. Because you leave them alone and feed them well, they make more of themselves. And you leave the bucks alone, they get older, they get bigger antlers. You feed them a little better, they get even bigger antlers. I mean, this is not complicated stuff here. Most of deer management is very simple concepts. Now, there's a lot of minutia to it, but the people side of it is definitely the challenge, and that's true whether you're in Australia or New Zealand. I had good fortune of spending some time in New Zealand even recently this year, or Canada or Africa. I mean, we all talk a little different, but our thoughts and our expectations and our aspirations as hunters and conservationists are all almost dead identical. We just have different landscapes, different cultures, and different interpretations, but the core tenets of why we're there and what we do are the exact same all around the world.
Wild, wild west out there, down in Australia, down under. The HuntStand podcast is powered by Yamaha Outdoors. For us, Yamaha side-by-sides like the Wolverine RMX 41000 LE are a game changer for us in the woods. Whether it's hauling gear to the deer stand, putting in work around the farm, or just hitting trails with the family, Yamaha delivers the reliability and comfort we count on. If you want to check them out and the full lineup of Yamaha ATVs, side-by-sides, and off-road vehicles, head to YamahaMotorsports.com.
We love all types of hunting, and that's why we love our partnership with Savage Arms. There are a lot of gun companies out there, but few that build pieces that cover every aspect of your life as a shooter. Savage gives you options for just about everything, from rimfires for plinking and small game hunting, to centerfire rifles for going after predators and big game, to shotguns for turkey hunting and wing shooting, even down to compact pistols for personal defense. When it comes to burning powder, we trust in Savage. And it's not just the variety of guns that is so impressive from Savage, it's the quality and innovation that has earned our respect. We're talking about technologies like the adjustable AccuStock and AccuTrigger, and the first all-American straight pull action with the Savage Impulse. You can see it all for yourself at savagearms.com. So like you said, it's all about the people. So jumping back to United States deer management, typically with any category of wildlife, whether it be waterfowl, wild turkeys, whitetails, elk, sheep, mule deer, you name it, they all have their organization. And a key function of any of those organizations is to make sure people are aligned on the same page. And also whoever is running the organization, kind of being the liaison between the species and the people who ultimately need to fund the efforts and be behind them. So Quality Deer Management Association, what stage was it at? And let's go through that. Like, where was it at when you got into it? And let's talk about like the progression and your time there.
Sure. So again, just kind of as a recap, the movement of quality deer management, the concept was coined by Al Brothers, the biologist, in 1975 with his book Producing Quality Whitetails. Again, that took about a decade to get some traction, even in Texas. And we take it for granted now, right? Managing habitats, managing densities, age structure, sex ratio, all these things that we now take for granted were new concepts in the 70s. Okay. Because prior to that, people are just happy to see deer and shoot anything. The thought of too many deer or managing for older bucks, I mean, these weren't concepts ready in the 50s and 60s and 70s. They became ready and ripe in the 70s and 80s and 90s. So that concept came into Texas. That's happened to be where I was an undergrad in the 1980s. So I got indoctrinated to the concept of quality deer management, in my undergraduate training, and then got to work and see it in practice on some of these ranches. That got me out to the University of Georgia, or helped me get there, where I met a guy named Joe Hamilton. And Joe Hamilton was also a University of Georgia graduate, but at that time was working in South Carolina as a state wildlife biologist. And he had befriended Al Brothers, read his book, and thought, you know what? I just think these concepts might have application in South Carolina, not just in Texas. So he was the sort of Johnny Appleseed of taking the concept from Texas and trying to see if it would work somewhere else. And so in the late 1980s, 1987, prior to that, Joe had made a few trips to Australia too, and he actually laid the groundwork for me to later get my job that I got there. But so he came back with this idea of an organization that he discovered in Australia called the Australian Deer Association, which there wasn't an exact model like that in the U.S. at the time, that, a true conservation, science-based deer organization, and this concept from Texas. So in 1987, 88, he formed the then South Carolina Quality Deer Management Association. Supposed to just be a state-based group, never had aspirations of being anything more. And so I show up as a bright-eyed graduate student 2 years later in 1990, and immediately meet Joe, and I'm like, yeah, mate, I'm on the same page with you. I've been learning about quality deer management for several years now already. So I was an easy convert, and so I joined the then state-based group. 2 years later, 1990, it was right about 91. They decided to expand to become a national organization. At that time, they called themselves the North American Quality Deer Management Association. They later dropped the North American bit. I joined as a charter life member. I was a graduate student still at the University of Georgia. I had no money. I was commuting 60 miles each way to grad school, eating a bologna sandwich every day for 2.5 years. But I wanted to be a charter life member. This organization meant something to me, and it was $1,000, and it may as well have been $100,000 in 1990 because I didn't have it. And but just by chance, I was awarded an academic award for the top graduate student that year, and I got $500 from the University of Georgia. And I told my wife, I was like, I want to sign this over towards half of my charter life membership to the QDMA. She said, no, you finally can fix that heater in your truck, because I was commuting in the winter with no heat in my truck. It was an hour-long drive, and I know it's not Michigan, but it still can get cold. And so I'd have to get out of my Walls camo jumpsuit in the parking lot next to the BMW boys in their preppy clothes. And, here I am pulling up with a beat up truck and getting out and, jumpsuit. But I said, no, I'd rather sign this over to QDMA. So I did. I signed that $500 check over to QDMA as half my charter life membership. So I was one of 37 charter life members. I then disappeared to Australia for 4 years. Okay. We just talked about that period of life. So when I get back, Joe Hamilton, again, the founder, said, boy, do we have, a job for you. We want you to take over the organization. I said, well, let's take a look at it. And it was not in good shape financially, structurally. It was a few years old at that time, but had only amassed about 3,000 members. None of it was computerized. It was literally stuck in a milk crate in manila folders with each month's expiration group just printed out on physical, paper copy. And we were heavily in debt to Joe himself. He had been cashing his retirement account to pay for the magazine that we were trying to publish. He didn't at that time desire to have any advertising in it, wanted it to be a science type journal. Unfortunately, no advertising means no revenue, and no revenue means you go in the hole pretty fast, and that's what was happening. So the organization was heavily in debt. We had no employees other than Joe's wife, who answered the phones, and she wanted out. She wanted to go to nursing school. So it was in great shape, ready just to blow up big. And Joe and the then board cornered me up one night around the fire pot and said, Brian, if you don't take this job with the QDMA, we're going to shut it down. I was like, oh man, we can't shut this thing down. This world needs this movement. We knew it had opportunity to make a big difference. And so I went to my wife first and said, will you give me 3 years to chase this dream and try to get this organization on its feet? And she said, and I said, there's no benefits, salary. I got to earn it from the first day, and it's nominal. I made $30,000 a year as the executive director, with no benefits, no nothing. I mean, zero anything else. And that's the 30,000 if I earned it myself. And no staff, no help. And then she said, okay, I'll give you 3 years. So we deferred buying a house, having a family. I went to the board and I wrote a business plan and said, if I'm going to take it, here's what the next 3 years are going to look like. And we're going to do some things different. We're going to form partnerships. We're going to generate revenue. We have to stay alive financially. That doesn't mean we have to sell our soul. And they were desperate, so they agreed to that. And so I dove in, called Joe, and said, I'm in. He said, great, mate. I'll bring all our assets up to your rental house. I was staying in a little 2-bedroom rental house here in Georgia. And, a couple of days later, he shows up in his El Camino. If people know what that is. Little car pickup sort of combo deal. And everything we fit after 9 years fit in the back of his El Camino with room to spare. And he shows up and hands me all our assets, including our financials. And our financials were a checkbook, not a group of financial documents. They were a checkbook. And we had exactly $142 in change in our national bank account when I started. So, we didn't start from much. And so he said, mate, we're behind you all the way. Go get them, Tiger. And so that was my handoff. And so we moved the QDMA national office into my spare bedroom. And that's where it was for a number of months. I needed a phone. I needed a fax. I needed a couple of basic things in life. So I was like, where can I get a loan from? Went to my bank. They laughed. That didn't go well. So I went to my former major professor, Dr. Larry Marchington, and his wife, Betty, and said, can you loan us $5,000? And they said, yep. And so I thought, who else will loan me $5,000? The Australians. So I actually wrote a letter to my old Australian Deer Association friends and said, would you be willing to float a loan to an American startup organization? Got a copy of that letter to this day. It says, this is a high risk loan. There's no guarantee of repayment. I was honest as I could be because I didn't know. But I said, I will give it everything that's in my heart and soul to pay you back and do so quickly. So that was our $10,000 startup fund. There was no GoFundMe at the time, no benevolent donors. It was, so I set out the first, again, staff of one, upstairs bedroom. The only thing we had to sell, what people wanted, was knowledge. They wanted a change. Hunters at that time were hungry. This is the late 1990s, early 2000s. Hunters across America had gotten fed up with seeing a bunch of young bucks, too many deer, damage to the habitat. They're like, isn't there something better? And so quality deer management offered something better. And even agencies weren't ready for it. We weren't initially welcomed even by state wildlife agencies. That's another story. I mean, we were considered, rebel rousers out there, starting a ruckus, teaching hunters to do something different than what the agencies want them to do. Well, at the end of the day, hunters wanted something different. And so what we had no money, we had no marketing, we barely had a publication at the time. What we had was connections. And so I started a nationwide series of what we called short courses. These were 2/3 of a day, 6-hour Saturday courses about quality deer management, food plots, agent on the hoof, whatever, science, deer movements, whatever topics. And so as I went around the country, I leveraged friends that I had or friends that other friends had, professional colleagues. And so if I was in Texas, I would draw on, this group of friends and biologists. If I was in Mississippi and Maine, New York State, Michigan, Missouri, whatever, I had a group of colleagues that I could either take with me or pull from that region. They did it for free. They did it repeatedly. We literally passed the hat to get gas money to go to the next event. I mean, it was hook and crook, absolute guerrilla warfare stuff. But slowly but surely, we started these spot fires. I consider it like a drip torch effect. I mean, we dropped a little ball of fire here, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew, and all of a sudden, a lot of these short courses became QDMA branches or chapters. And so all of a sudden, there was a group of 200 people in that community promoting it. And then all of a sudden, we had 10 branches, then 20, then 40, then 60, then 80 branches, and all of a sudden, we went from 2,000 to 10,000 to 20,000 to 30, 40, 50, 60,000 members in 15 years. I mean, we were growing at light speed because it was feeding on itself. We didn't have to market, we didn't promote, we didn't have slick advertising campaigns and direct mail, and we did some of those things later in it. But it was absolute guerrilla. It was viral before viral was a word. In terms of how it was just growing on itself. But it took that initial push, and I credit people like Dr. Carl Miller, Dr. Grant Woods, Greg Harper, Dr. Harper, Harry Jacobson, Bronson Strickland, Steve Damaris. I mean, I can go on and on. All of these dear names that some of your listeners will know were part of that early movement who gave to the cause because they believed in the cause. They didn't expect to get pay or glory or customers or clients out of it. They just said, it's the right thing to do. Hunters need to learn about these things. This is good for deer. It's good for conservation. And so we kicked it off. And so that started what ended up being a 23-year run for me, running that organization. And that ended in 2020, just as COVID was hitting. And that was when I decided to exit stage left and turn over the reins to some new blood and take it in a new direction, which they have done, and renamed the organization. So those that knew it by the name Quality Deer Management Association would now know it as the National Deer Association. So they have made some changes to kind of redirect the focus of the organization. But the era that I was there and that Joe Hamilton was primarily there was the QDMA era. And we're very proud that we fundamentally changed how deer are managed and hunted across North America in a 25-year period. If I've got anything that I can really take some credit for in my professional life, it's that. And it's something I'm very proud of because it was much needed and it was hunter driven. This was not pushed down by government. This was grassroots up, guerrilla warfare, make a difference. And now this concept, quality deer management, is so ingrained that you can't hardly find hunters today that don't practice it. A lot of them don't even know where it came from or why. It just seems logical and natural. And that's great. They don't need to know of the fights in Mississippi and the politics that it took to get some of this stuff done. It was, like I said, if you're an old school deer biologist, my age or older, you've got some scars because it is a lot harder out there than a lot of people will give it, credit for. It wasn't, there's no political correctness in our day when it came to a lot of these issues. It was just, screaming and yelling and hollering and fighting and carried on. But, that was the day.
Brian, one of my favorite stories you've shared with us, and I've heard in a few different camps with you, was during that grassroots events, traveling the country time. There were several of them, but there's one in particular I thought was it's worth sharing with the audience. It's when you learned from a knowledgeable feller that, in fact, deer don't shed their antlers, right?
Yeah, I learned that very early on in one of my talks, and I remember because it was really early in my career. And Dr. Carl Miller, in fact, said, Brian, I want you to speak at this public meeting. And I said, about what? And he said, you pick your topic. Our students the graduate students we put out of the University of Georgia have to be able to speak to the public because that's where the rubber meets the road. Okay. He said, pick a topic of deer that you like and become an expert in it enough to at least fool the crowd. I said, okay. So I was like, I really love antler deformities, odd things, anything odd about deer antlers. Antlers are so fascinating for so many reasons. I could talk hours just on the science of antlers, but there's so many reasons that a deer can have something different in terms of the shape and configuration of their antlers. So I came up with this very scientific, complex, graduate level talk on deer deformities and contralateral this and abscission layers and photoperiod. And I was using every college word I'd paid for and a few others. And so because I want to impress Dr. Carl Miller, he was my major professor. He's going to be in the audience. By God, I was going to teach him that I was a smart guy. And so I gave this 45-minute PowerPoint presentation, and thought I had really imparted some deep wisdom, feeling pretty cocky about myself. And a guy comes up to me after the meeting, and he said, Brian, he said, I really enjoyed your talk. I said, I'm glad. Hopefully you learned something. He said, well, he said, you seem to know all about them deer horns. And I immediately got my hackles up because, horns and antlers aren't the same thing. To a deer biologist, that causes a little consternation. But anyway, he said, you know all about them deer horns. He said, I got a question for you. I was like, well, okay. He said, can we step outside? I was like, daggone, this must be a good question if we got to go outside to even talk about it. So I'm getting there thinking this guy's going to hit me with some deep science question. So I get out there, and he kind of gets up in my personal space a little too close, and he kind of pokes me in the chest. And he said, Brian, he said, you know what my brother-in-law reckons? No, sir, I don't know what your brother-in-law reckons. He said, deer drop their horns on the ground and grow a new set every year. What do you think about that? And I just talked about the deepest science of antlers. And this guy didn't even know that deer drop their antlers every year and grew a new set. And so it taught me an important lesson early. Thankfully, it was early in my career, that I'm not there to impress anybody. If that happens, great. If they think I know about deer, great. But I'm there to teach them something, whatever it is, subject matter that I'm trying to convey in the most unarrogant and most informative, easy to understand manner that I can. And if I'm talking down to a little bit of the audience that's smart and well educated ahead of the crowd, great. But we can't take it for granted that everybody's on the same page. And a lot of it's just lack of sheer experience. And, if you didn't grow up in a hunting environment, it's the barrier to entry can be quite frightening to a lot of people because they don't want to be the goober, right? If you didn't grow up hunting deer, and all of a sudden you're 30 years old and you're in a social setting and you're among a bunch of guys like us that have been doing it so long we've forgotten about it, more than they'll probably know. It's frightening because they don't want to look like that stupid goober in the group, right? And I always want to be embarrassed, particularly as young, arrogant males. And anyway, so we just have to understand, come to people where they are and meet them where they are and work up from there. So I've always tried to keep that humility when it comes to sharing knowledge, and to know that I'm just there to teach and not there to impress.
Yeah, we coming out of QDMA, I think the stars align perfectly for you joining us at HuntStand, and obviously since then you've helped us tremendously, built out some of our most important tools in the app with the whitetail activity forecast and the nationwide rut map, and now some of the new features under the Ultimate membership where you work with Jim Heffelfinger to build out the Western big game tool set. HuntStand offers the very best in mapping, e-scouting, and even gear savings. And the best membership level that you can get through HuntStand is the new HuntStand Ultimate membership. We've got activity forecasts for whitetails, mule deer, elk, and blacktails, and we've got rut maps for all those species as well. And we've got great integrated mapping features like 3D national aerial imagery and a bunch of other base maps and overlays that you're going to want to be able to have access to hunt and scout the most effectively. On top of all that, as a HuntStand Ultimate member, you can get up to 50% savings on great gear from some of the top hunting brands. Go to huntstand.com to learn more. We've built quite a relationship. We've had some good times together so far. And it sounds like you spent a lot of years teaching people how to do things where you maybe missed out on a period with the actual application yourself, but it sounds like now you're having some fun getting your hands dirty. So tell us about what you're doing now.
Yeah,
in addition to HuntStand.
If anybody asks, I have two jobs. I've tried to slow down a little bit in quote semi-retirement, but I have not been successful whatsoever. I'm still putting in 60 plus hours a week, but I'm having more fun than I've had in a long time. I still work part-time, half-time with HuntStand. I love that. I love, I was brought on board with HuntStand 5 years ago by the founder, Lanford Holloway, good, close personal friend of mine. He reached out when I left QDMA, and so we want somebody to help navigate the the whitetail space and build out functionality and relationships. So I handled corporate relations. I handled some of the app build stuff, as you talked about. Love that. Love working with you guys. I mean, the HuntStand team is a fun team. We have a lot of fun together. We accomplish a lot, I think, and we're nimble for a small group. I think we do a lot of good work. But in the last 2 years, me and a business partner have formed a side company where we specialize in large turnkey hunting properties. So we try to find, everybody's heard the company, and the term, we buy ugly houses. We kind of buy ugly deer properties. That's kind of our mantra, is to find something that may look ugly cosmetically, but has the bones to be something very special. So we look for the right bones, typically large tracts, 1,000 acres or more, which are considered large here in the Southeast, even maybe small by Texas standards, would be giant by your standards up where you guys are. But so we look for those, roughly 1,000-acre tracts, maybe sometimes bigger, a little smaller, whatever. And then just really, I get to go in and dream. And the luxury of my business partner gives me complete autonomy to say, lay it out like you think it should be laid out. And we'll pay for what it costs. And then we'll pass that cost on to the new owner, but we will do it right. And we will do turnkey. So we're talking about roads, thin timber, food plots, gates, building barn dominium, building a dock out in a lake right now, a skinning shed, ordering a bunch of brand new deer blinds, brand new office chairs put in them, food plots. I mean, just everything to where you walk in, you go, wow, this thing is, and laid out really strategically from a hunting perspective. So there's a logic to everything, how you enter or exit a stand or an area, and why that stands there, and why the timber right next to it was thinned to a certain density, so that you get habitat next to bedding area right next to the, everything is laid out to maximize 100% huntability and production of deer and turkeys. In this particular case, we do also have some hogs on this track, and some people enjoy them, but I've even got a strategic hog plan that'll keep hogs out of the uplands so we can hunt them, have fun shooting them, but for the most part, keep them out of our upland food plots and let them stay down in the swamp. So getting to do all that. In fact, I'm leaving as soon as this podcast is over to head down for another day and 2 days. I'm going to spend the night down there tonight, and got to flag in some food plots in a timber stand that our timber guys are working in now. We're going to put in a nice 3-acre plot in the middle of one of those stands, and I got to go in and ground truth the terrain to make sure that I pick the best spot for it. And then, entry and exit routes and that sort of thing. And then we've got a long stretch of river frontage that we're going to mulch with a forestry mulch or some vistas, so that we can put a picnic table right along the big river there, and the family can come have a picnic there on the river someday if they so choose. And so we think of everything from wildlife habitat things to other features that would just be, every family would love to have a dock in their lake, a picnic table by their river. We try to think of the whole experience, so that when somebody comes, they go, holy crap, I've never seen a property this thoughtful. And we start with an ugly property and end with something that's really, really high end and cool. And so far it's been very successful. We haven't even had to bring in a broker or an agent yet. We sell them direct. We buy them and sell them direct, because first people that see them generally buy them, which is great. And so yeah, so far I'm having just a ton of fun. Now that's a lot of work, and I come home, I'm grimy, I'm physically just beat. I've got holes in my britches, sweat pouring out of every orifice. And my wife's like, are you sure you're having fun? I've spent a day on a pole saw in a swamp, for example, getting, spiders and bitten by everything that crawls, and come back, I'm filthy and tired. And I said, man, I'm having a ball. So if you like that hard work and seeing something come to fruition, this is a lot of fun for me. So it's a perfect combination with the HuntStand stuff. The thing I really, really appreciate about the HuntStand platform is that when I add some value to something there, it can affect hundreds of thousands, perhaps even a couple of million hunters and landowners in some way. I never had that luxury. Even at QDMA, our audience was smaller than what HuntStand currently enjoys. So that gives me great pride as a deer biologist and educator, that I can create something that can affect so many acres and so many people. On the other hand, I'm working the opposite end of the spectrum with these land builds. I'm building them for generally one family generally. So it's complete opposite, but it's also really cool to hand something over that once was a very unproductive, ugly, just crappy old track of dirt, and now make it sing a song that fulfills dreams for somebody, and they walk away going, wow, this is the best thing that we've ever done, is have this farm for our family and our hopefully future generations to come. So I get to live the both ends of that spectrum at the same time. And so it's a really cool, I'm at a cool stage of life that I'm having a ball, and still getting to hunt and travel a lot. Just came back from a great overseas hunt in New Zealand. Going to Montana in a few weeks to hunt birds out there. So, I'm still running and gunning hard and enjoying life. And just got back from an axis deer hunt in Florida a couple of weeks ago. Shot a whole bunch of axis deer for the freezer. And if you haven't had them, man, talk about tasty. I had some garlic Parmesan axis deer brats for dinner last night. Man, they were so good. I want to slap my mama. Good stuff.
Well, man, Brian, sounds like you just really enjoying things now. And I know we've got a pretty cool project that we're going to be launching here soon that pretty much kind of encompasses your life's work with quality deer management. So just to kind of drop that for the audience out there, but Mr. Logan's over here working on that, but excited to drop that. And you're our second virtual guest for the new video podcast series, man. So been fun. I know we've gotten to talk a lot of whitetail, and so I know we're going to get you on here again for probably more whitetail and who knows what next.
Hey, I'm always open for it. I love to talk, as you can tell, and but I just love this profession. I love the people, and that's what I love. I love the lifestyle that hunting affords, whether you do it for a living like I do, or you just live it. But I've always said, if you talk about what you talk about when you're not at work is what you love, right? And no disrespect to people who work in construction or any other field. I'm not throwing any aspersions here, but I haven't met any of those that talk about, different electrical wirings after hours.
No,
they talk about hunting and fishing and golf and whatever, but hunting and fishing are two of the most commonly talked about things in every circle I've ever been in, any country I've ever been in. Now, I don't live in New York City and run with people that think wall art is all that cool, but that's when I know I'm in the right spot, when I can, my wife even says, don't you ever get tired of talking about deer? And I was like, no, honey, I don't.
Mine too.
I don't. Her mom even said one time about how much I hunted, because I hunt a lot. And she's like, well, he'll probably grow out of it like your daddy did. I haven't grown out of it. I hope I never grow out of it. When I stop hunting and when I stop talking about deer, I'm gonna be in a box, worm food, because I'm so passionate about this space, and that's what drives me, is finding other people that are equally passionate about it, and watching their eyes light up when they learn something, or harvest a good deer, or plant their first food plot, or whatever it is that lights that fire even a little bit more. And when that spark is lit, man, good things happen.
Love it. Brian, appreciate you coming on today. Can't wait to have you on here again.
Anytime, my friend.